The Australian Defence Force needs more people. They're facing significant recruitment and retention challenges, and currently only Australian citizens can serve in our military, except in exceptional circumstances. So, in a bold proposal from the federal opposition, but one that has growing support, Pacific Islanders should be allowed to enlist. That's right, a Pacific battalion. And in exchange for fighting and defending this country, they'll get an accelerated path to Australian citizenship. While not exactly the same, the US and British armies already have deals for Pacific enlistment. So, while this proposal could solve Australia's problems, is it a fair deal for the Pacific? Dr. Tarsisius Kambutalaka is an associate professor from the University of Hawaii, and he says there are concerns around the proposal.
I think there are moral issues as well that both Australia and the Pacific Islands must consider in discussing how Pacific Islanders are used to for jobs that Australians would otherwise not be able or want to do. And we've seen those concerns expressed in relation to the Seasonal Workers Program, that this is another way in which Pacific Island bodies or Pacific people have been used as laborers in Australia. And with this new proposal for Pacific Islanders to be recruited for the Australian military, I think those kinds of concerns will again emerge.
Yeah, and fairly so. We know Pacific soldiers already serve in the British Army and for the US, so I guess would Pacific Islanders, if given the chance, enlist for Australia?
I think they would, and there are two major reasons that some Pacific Islanders will consider joining, and they are one, economic reasons, and two, immigration reasons. Now, there are slight differences in the way in which Pacific Islanders have been enlisted in both the US as well as the Fijian in the British military. And the thing is that people from American Samoa and the COFA countries cannot vote for the commander-in-chief of the US military, who is the president of the United States, but they can die for the commander-in-chief. The other important point is that there is a high per capita death amongst Pacific Islanders involved in the US military and in combats in various places where the US has been involved. And so in terms of the population of Pacific Islanders and the number of Pacific Islanders who have been killed, it's really, really high.
Yeah, that would be a concern. What about the importance of ensuring long-term benefits for veterans? Because, we know that some Fijian vets in the UK, despite fighting on the front lines in Afghanistan and Iraq, have effectively been left in kind of immigration limbo after they serve because they haven't seen those long-term benefits.
That's a very important point, and I think Australia could look at not only the British, but the Americans as well. A lot of Pacific Islanders who joined the US military, after the war, the veterans have struggled to get access to services and to get access to some of the benefits that were promised to them. And so if the Australian government were to recruit Pacific Islanders, and then those kinds of issues have to be addressed.
Indeed. What about cultural measures? Like, what would the Australian Defence Force have to implement to ensure that it was welcoming to Pacific soldiers?
Joining the military, as we all know, is a very risky assignment. It's a job that carries a lot of risk. And therefore, I think the Australian government will have to be aware of and, the nuances of getting people to fight for you, because basically what you're doing is you're asking people from the Pacific Islands to go and die for Australia. And that's a big ask. And therefore, what are the cultural protocols across the Pacific Islands for when you go out and ask somebody to come and do that for you? Yes, a lot of Pacific Islanders might be attracted because of the economic and immigration benefits that they can get from it. But also we need to consider that what we are doing is we're militarizing Pacific Islander bodies. We are taking Pacific Islander bodies and use them for military purposes outside of the Pacific, most possibly, potentially within the Pacific, but for somebody else's military purposes.
Now, given the current geopolitical tensions, what might the optics be if the Pacific were seen to be fighting for Australia?
Not to sensationalize things, but I would think that, Pacific Islander participation in militaries from Australia or from the US would in any ways connect Pacific Islands to any wars that take place outside of the Pacific. For instance, places like Taiwan. Already Pacific Island places could become potential targets, as bases for military bases. And having Pacific Island bodies participate in these things, I think, will potentially add to that.
Indeed. Finally, what kind of Pacific consultation should take place to ensure that if the proposal was followed through with, then it would be mutually beneficial?
There has to be both regional discussions, which would take place with the Pacific Islands Forum, as well as the bilateral individual Pacific Island countries. And any such discussion would, I think, look at the experiences that Pacific Islanders have with the seasonal workers program. I know that there's different things altogether, but there are, I think, issues that we are finding with the seasonal workers program that could become intensified in recruitments for military where the risks are much higher. The risks for Pacific Islanders in the Australian military, particularly in this time of hyper geopolitical competition and the potential for conflict that it might bring to Pacific Island people, I think we need to think through that very, very carefully.
Dr. Tarsisius Kambutalaka, thank you, True.
Thank you so much for having me.